So, Brett, what do you think about that statement by the president in Alaska?
Well, I just think that it's following that track that we've been seeing of speeches where something goes wrong in the speech, something is exaggerated. He says something that's just not true. I mean, Hillary Clinton wrote and said that she flew over as New York senator and saw 9/11 the next day, and used those words. It looked like the gates of hell. Senator Biden at the time was in D.C. He didn't go to 9/11 Ground Zero till 9 days later. So the White House is going to say he meant the 9 days later trip. But when you're in Alaska and you're talking about recollections of 9/11, and already the family's not at Ground Zero or one of the sites, maybe that's not the time to exaggerate.
Yeah, I read the Wall Street Journal story today they interviewed many, many people who were born exactly on the day that Joe Biden was born. And they spoke about what it's like to be 80. And some of them say, oh, it's fine. And some of them say, no, you really lose a step. And other people say, you can go downhill in a hurry. I don't think this cannot be talked about, Brett, but it's also something that it is important to cushion how one discusses it. How are you handling it?
Yeah, I don't think it's about the age. It's about, what we're seeing, about his ability to speak clearly, about his ability to even deliver teleprompter speeches. I think that the Vietnam news conference was an example of what people are seeing with their own eyes. You can say, I can't keep up with him, and the White House can say, he's got such energy. And then we can all see his lack of answers, or I'm going to go to bed, or they turn on the music and cut off the mic at the end of the news conference because they don't want him to say anything else. And those are things that people can see with their own eyes and hear with their own ears. So I don't think it's the number. I do think it's the capability, and it is clearly making Democrats very, very concerned.
It's not only the capability, it's the contrast. And I go to the Frank Bruni argument that Donald Trump is really old too. You have interviewed the president face to face for a long period of time in the last couple of weeks. I spoke to him for more than an hour last week on the radio. How would you contrast President Trump right now with President Biden right now? Because I think that is the response to Frank Bruni. But I'd like to hear what you think the contrast is.
Yeah, I think it's significant. I think his ability to recall facts and to tell stories is exponentially better than we've seen President Biden extemporaneously. He does do a lot of interviews, President Trump. President Biden does not. He mentioned being a Truth Social because his golf game is pretty good. He's definitely the best golfer we've ever had as a president, and he can shoot scores. I mean, he can really go after it, and that takes a skill as well.
Brett. The first question I asked him last week was, do you remember Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs 50 years ago? Because I was setting up a ratings question, and he said, oh yeah, and by the way, Bobby Riggs beat Margaret Court 3 months earlier. Who remembers that? I mean, that's actually one of those things that I didn't tell him about Margaret Court, but out of nowhere, he pulls that out and throws it on the table. That's not something I think President Biden can do.
Well, I agree with you. And I think that his ability to recall moments and to look back at moments and kind of and talk about them is really exponentially better than President Biden. So I think if President Trump is the nominee, he is itching to have that debate, at least one, with President Biden. And the question is whether President Trump gets to that point. Right now, if you look at the polls, that's what it's heading toward. But we have a long way to go.
I kept Byron York for 3 segments this morning, Brett, and that's very long to impose on Byron. But I said we're in the hurricane cone business now. We're like Frank Cantori or Jim Cantori trying to figure out where this primary is going to go. There are a wide variety of variables. But I have to say, not only is he ahead in the polls, I might change my bet on Candidate Casino because nothing's moving. It's static. And do you agree with that it's just kind of fixed right now?
I do. I've heard a lot of people talk about, ground game in Iowa and New Hampshire and how, the former president is not, well positioned with ground game. But I do know he's well positioned in the polls. He's well positioned in people who, even Republicans who are not inclined to support the former president, have been somehow motivated by what they believe is a political effort to go after him. So in a strange way, in the primary, it has very much helped him. And we've talked about before the question of whether it may hurt him in the general election. We'll see how they all play out, but it's going to play out in the middle of the campaign season.
I'm sure you saw the reception the former president received in Iowa, both by the frat and by the stadium. A few lefties tried to say he got booed mercilessly. That's not what I saw. What did you see when the former president showed up in Iowa this weekend, Brett?
Yeah, I saw big crowds. I saw, of course, there are incidents where, he's, someone gives him the other number one sign, but you're in a big crowd of people. And I think that overall, where he's been going in these places has seen a big outpouring of mostly support, but obviously detractors there as well. Listen, Ron DeSantis was at that game too, and it was a much smaller affair, but he claims that, he was in the seats with the people, not behind the glass in the suite, et cetera, et cetera. The difference is he's the Florida governor, not the former president.
Yeah, and that reaction of the frat boys, that really said to me, Iowa is Trump country. Maybe the Florida governor turns that around. I'm driving down to see Chris Christie in New Hampshire today at a town hall, and I think he's not in it to win it, but he's in it to get a one-on-one with Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump's going to do Republican debates. I'm not sure. I used to think he would, but what do you think, Brett?
Well, I think maybe as the field winnows and there's a few people and he wants to get on stage in Iowa before the caucuses, I think that that's possible. I don't know whether him skipping that debate of ours in Iowa back in 2015 ahead of the caucuses affected that turnout or that race, but obviously he didn't win Iowa in 2016's election. So who knows? He may, but I agree with you. If he has a massive lead in the polls, his political advisors may say it's just not worth it.
Now, I want to throw a curveball at you at the end. I don't know if you were watching Monday Night Football last night. Peyton and what was your reaction? I told the fetching Mrs. Hewitt this morning, I stayed up way too late because it just bothers me so much when that happens to somebody.
I know. I mean, all the hype. You saw all the Jets fans like waiting to see Aaron Rodgers, and then 4 plays in, he goes down. Now, I don't know, the extent, or I haven't heard everything about the injury, but all I know is that I stayed up to the very end to see that punt return, and it was an awesome game. So congratulations to the Jets.
Well, thank you for getting up early, because I did not stay up until the very end. I just stayed up a while thinking, my gosh, what are they going to tell us about Aaron Rodgers? Bret Baier, thank you so much. Great to talk to you. Special report tonight at 6 p.m. Bret will be on with, and they'll be talking about that Andrews Air Force, or the Bergendorf Air Force Base exchange, I'm sure.